Hey guys, thanks for joining. We're going to give everybody about 5 minutes to join and then we'll get started. All right, guys, thanks for joining. We're going to get started. So today's topic that we're going to be going through are design sprints. We'll start by giving a quick objective for the day. We're going to spend about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to about 15 minutes of Q&A. This is being recorded. I've gotten some questions offline. This is being recorded. It'll be on our New Haircuts YouTube channel. So you can watch it again. You can share it with friends. And there will also be some additional resources that you can check out that'll be at the on the last slide. And then I'll be available whenever for questions, and I'll send out my contact information. So the goal of today is to, like I said, introduce you guys to the process of design sprints, this 5-day approach to rapidly prototyping and testing with customers, and just to give you some of the insights in terms of the value of the sprint. And I think that's a good segue to talk a little bit about why at New Haircut we like design sprints and why we started applying them. For context, what we're going to be talking about today are using design sprints in the vein of building software, right? So web and mobile products, because that's where our expertise is. We're a design and engineering firm. But design sprints in general can be applied to a number of things. In the sprint book that the guys at Google Ventures wrote, they give examples where they built a robot. I've gotten questions where people want to use a design sprint to help with their sales process and sales strategy and marketing websites. So it can be. It's just for today, we're going to be talking about how to apply design sprints to building web and mobile products. So by definition, a design sprint is this 5-day process for designing and building prototypes that you then test with live customers at the end of the sprint. And I think the value lies in the fact that it's 5 days. It's this packaged process which you can apply, which I think traditionally has taken teams weeks and months to figure out where they want to go with their features and products. And what you're doing is you're saving an exponential amount of time and money to focus on the things that you should be based on what your customers are telling you. And so there's always been these definitions of lean and agile and building MVPs. But as far as we know, there's never really been this great process or framework for what it means to apply lean. So about a year ago, the way that we got into this was my partner, John, was looking at some of the things that Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky and Braden and the team at Google Ventures were talking about putting into this sprint book that they published a few months back. And I recommend everybody go out and read it, buy it. It's a great read. It'll really give you the full context of the sprint. But they were using it inside Google to build products like Hangouts and Gmail. And all of Google kind of got behind it and started adopting this process. And then it got refined and refined and refined. And Jake and team eventually went into Google Ventures and started applying this process to the portfolio companies that they work with under Google Ventures. And again, refined it some more and then put this book out to really basically publish how they think through design and making sure that teams are focused on the right priorities and building the right features and products. So as a company, as a firm, as an agency that's outside of the actual companies building these things, New Haircut always struggled, I think, and it's a big struggle with anyone that's providing outsourced services like this. There's a struggle in terms of what you as a company want to build, what the customers actually want and need, and then what our team or any team that's outside of your four walls understands in terms of the market, the opportunity, the solution, the ideas, the things that you've been talking about and dreaming about for months. And to put all those three pieces into an actual solution that gets built and designed well, it was always a little bit ambiguous. And so the traditional ways had always been to write some specs, to fire up your balsamic and kind of build your own wireframes and then share them with designers and developers to put an RFP out, right? I have some press out there on Medium about my feelings about RFPs. It's not positive, because I think there's always been this challenge in terms of, I said this, you heard that, we built something entirely different altogether. And the sprint really kind of levels that whole discussion. So as New Haircut, it's really helped us understand the problems that companies like yourselves are thinking about and then really building solutions together collaboratively, and a lot more quickly, more cost efficiently, and hopefully with better success once they hit the market. So that's why New Haircut is really excited about sprints. I think other agencies should look into, kind of adopting them. I think teams with inside companies should really consider learning about sprints and executing their own sprints. So let's get into it a little bit more. One of the questions I get when talking about sprints and companies are interested in sprints is, under what conditions should we run a sprint? On the next slide, we're going to talk more specifically about mile markers of things that are going on within your product development where you should run a sprint. But in terms of conditions, these are the big four, and these are probably, they're probably obvious, but these are the big four in terms of what you should be kind of checking off your list to say a design sprint is going to really help us, because you're trying to move fast. You have big challenges, right? There's a lot on the line. Budgets are always tight. Timelines are always tight. You might be stuck. How many times do you hear about a startup that needs to launch features X, Y, and Z in order to close their A round? But in order to close that A round, they need those features. So it's kind of this chicken or egg. And they really need to make sure that they put their time and money into the right things. And then, alternatively, you also hear about, I'm sure, co-founders kind of having ego and bias and opinion based on their experience and their discussions with customers. And if time allows, we'll get into one of the sprints we ran for a team where they had spent a year or so building things that weren't really going to get them to the finish line. And so they would ask us kindly to leave the room during the sprint, where they would kind of close the door and then have these heated discussions. But the good news is that, it sounds dramatic, but they had spent 12 months or so building something that they shouldn't have been focused on, and within a couple days they kind of had realigned. So there's a lot of power in using the sprint and understanding what the customers are thinking, and even bringing in outside perspective. Okay, so in terms of, if you're a software or technology business, what are the things that you're about to get started on where a sprint could be helpful? So you might be pre-product. You're at the idea stage where you have an idea for a new dating app, Uber for X, something like that, and you want to make sure that that's something, there's a market there. And I'm sure you have your pitch decks and you've done your market research, but really have you put pen to paper to really validate that that's something that you should spend your budget on and your time on? So an entirely new solution is a great fit for a sprint. You might have a product, you might have a platform, and you want to launch a new feature, a series of new features, and you want to make sure that those are appropriate. Or you might be entering a new market, and by market, we mean moving into, so maybe today you're selling to consumer and you want to start selling to enterprise. Maybe you have a web solution and you want to bring that into mobile. So these are good opportunities to run a sprint to make sure that that would be a good investment. Okay, who should be in the room during this 5-day sprint? Just for reference, when we run sprints, we do follow the rule that there should be 7 or fewer in the room. Otherwise, it gets to be a little bit like you're ruling the mob. And from a timing perspective, it's Monday to Friday. We're going to get into each day shortly. But it's Monday to Friday so that you're not breaking up the week in any way. Some startups work 7 days a week anyway, and maybe it doesn't matter as much. But if you're doing a typical 5-day work week, it's important to go Monday through Friday. And we try to run the sprint from 10 to 5 so that you have time at the beginning of your day and at the end of your day to do all your typical craziness, your meetings, your email, all that stuff. So the people that should be in the room are the decider. The decider is who ultimately has the big vote in terms of which challenge you solve for, and eventually which solutions turn into your prototype. There is voting, and there are 6, 7 people in the room that are all thinking through solutions and contributing, but the decider at the end of the day is the one that ultimately picks the direction. The facilitator is typically somebody that we bring in when we're working with companies. It's a product manager. He or she is somebody that has been through many sprints, understands the roles that people should be playing, the process itself, how much time should be spent on different exercises, and really just kind of keeps the momentum going, because it is 5 days, but it's extremely aggressive in terms of timelines and what needs to be accomplished. The marketing expert is somebody that really kind of owns language, and you're going to see how language is important as we get into some of the solution sketching. But language is just as important as the designs and the functionality of your prototype, to make sure that customers are understanding what you're trying to communicate to them. Financial expert is just as important as well. They're thinking about budgets, they're thinking about pricing, they're thinking about sensitivity to pricing that your customers may have. So their influence is important in this discussion. Technology person, so we typically will bring in these last two roles, the tech expert and the design expert. So those are, from New Haircut, those are lead engineers or lead designers that, again, have also been through multiple sprints and can help when it comes to directing not only the process of sketching and what kind of technology solutions might be existing or can be leveraged, but just how to get through all that and how to bring it all together. Many times when we work with teams, they also bring in their own engineering and design, because there would be a shift and a handoff when you're working with an outside design sprint team into bringing this into product development within your own company. Okay, just a few rules. One is to make sure you're paying attention to what the facilitator is saying. They're in charge in terms of what you should be doing, how you should be executing it. Again, the decider ultimately decides. That's their job. You're going to contribute, you're going to vote, but that's their job to ultimately make the call, and no devices in the room. There is a point when on Monday, which we're going to get into soon, when you do a little bit of research and people might have laptops open and phones open. But other than that, no phones, no laptops, no tablets, none of that stuff. There's just no time. You need to focus 100%. Okay, so these are the 5 days. We'll break them down subsequently. Monday, you're mapping out your goals for the week and the customer journey. Tuesday, you're doing a whole bunch of sketching. Wednesday, you're deciding based on those sketches which solution you're going to prototype on Thursday. And on Friday, you're doing your live customer testing. So again, Monday, it's 10 a.m. We're going to start the sprint. So the expression that's used is to kind of start at the end. Where do you want to be at the end of this sprint? What was the goal going into it? Think about how you want to look in 6 months to a year from now. What will have happened? And I think it's important to call out that success, or the goal of the sprint, is to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And the sprint may prove that and invalidate that you're on the wrong path. And that's your opportunity to pivot and think about some other challenge to solve for, or some other opportunity. But again, you've invalidated that in 5 days instead of months or years later. So set up your goals. The way that we think through the goals are to have these kind of guiding sprint questions. So at the end of when your goal has been met, what's been accomplished? What's true? What does success and failure, what will that have looked like? You need to think about both scenarios so that you can plan, because if you have invalidated, where do you go from there? It can't just be your dead end. So you got to think through that as well. And how will you measure success? So once you've built your prototype and then built your product or your features and launched, how can you go back and say, this is what we aim to accomplish in the sprint, and it's been accomplished because we set these parameters and we hit on them. So one of the exercises during Monday is this map. The map is, if you're thinking about a product like Uber, the map might be, how can a passenger get a ride from a stranger to get from here to there? So that would be a map, and that would be kind of this 5 to 15 step journey that you'd map out on a whiteboard or a big sticky paper. It's important to keep it simple, because when you don't keep it simple, this is a shot of our team doing some early mapping, and you can see some of the branches and sub-branches and all this other craziness going on, which led to Ileana here kind of freaking out and thinking like we've gone way too far in the first hour or so. So keep it simple. There's going to be plenty of time to get into the details of this thing. And you want to have this map, which is then again going to guide all of the questions that need to be answered at the end of the sprint in order to make sure that you sketched the right solutions and built the right prototypes and tested the right thing with your customers. On Monday, there's going to be time to bring in some outside experts. So you might bring in people, depending on the size of the company and who's doing what and what roles you have. You might have a customer service center, right? You might be a large company and you have a whole staff of people talking to customers day in and day out. Those would be experts in terms of what your customers think, how they feel, how they react to different things. You might want to bring a couple of those people into the room, operations or support people like that. You might bring in actually, somebody an investor that's mentored or sat on the board of a similar company or a company that's faced similar challenges that you're trying to solve for. You might bring in even one or two of your early customers to ask them some questions. And that's just going to really kind of set the groundwork for, this is the challenge we're trying to solve, and here's how people are thinking about it. A lot of the questions that you're going to ask throughout the sprint will be in the form of how might we. And I think these came out of IDEO in terms of just phrasing it, because it kind of removes bias, because when you ask the question in the form of how might we, it's open-ended, and you really kind of open up the discussion to thinking about solutions without any kind of bias. So a lot of the questions that you'll see on these stickies as you're thinking through ideas come in this form of how might we. So that's Monday. On Tuesday, this is where a lot of the sketching and actual kind of hard work begins. You start with these things called lightning demos. So this is a shot of our team with, you can see their computers open and whatnot, and everybody's kind of doing some research on competing solutions in other fields that have nothing to do with what you're thinking about, but maybe offer some kind of help or direction or baseline for how you should be thinking about these. So it's kind of like this is your point in time to do some down and dirty research. And you can see Sabrina at the whiteboard there taking notes as people are kind of calling through ideas. And I think that, so in terms of timing, because again, just about everything during the sprint is timed, you have 3 minutes to look at different solutions and take notes and get them out on whiteboards and stickies. So those are called lightning demos. Then there's this 4-step sketch process that we're going to go through. And I'll show you a couple examples of what these look like. But you're going to spend about 20 minutes walking around the room looking at the things you did during lightning demos, your goals, your questions. And what's starting to happen already by Tuesday morning is that you have this living museum of ideas and sketches and words and language and all sorts of things that you can start to take notes on, so that you get a feel for where you're going to go with things. So you have 20 minutes to kind of take all those notes. You're doing it silently, individually, but as a team. And then you're starting to doodle out some ideas. So what that looks like, you can see some of the notes people were walking around taking in this sprint. Then they started to doodle some ideas. Then they started to add their own notes to those doodles, because what's going to happen is the next step, and you can see some of the stickers where they were just making notes of the things that caught their eye and they wanted to pay attention to. Because the next step is this exercise called Crazy Eights. So you take a piece of paper, you fold it in 3, you have 8 boxes, and you get 8 minutes to draw up 8 variations to solutions that would solve for the challenge that you're in the room thinking about. This is tough. It's timed. You have basically 1 minute per box. It's important that you spend all 8 minutes and come up with 8 ideas. And a lot of the questions we get are, I'm not a designer, maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're a customer service rep, or whatever your kind of function is or your background is. It doesn't matter, because pretty isn't important. It's just getting ideas onto paper. And what you're going to do with those ideas next, and you can see some of these sketches that people have done. What you're going to do next with those Crazy Eights is you're going to turn them into solutions. So this is where you start to create storyboards. So this is as close to kind of the function of a designer as you'll get during the sprint. It can be uncomfortable, but I promise, it's ugly is okay. It just needs to be as self-explanatory and self-standing as it can be, just like you would be, when you're walking through an app or a website today. You don't have somebody in the background moderating, so it needs to stand on its own. Keep it anonymous so that there's no bias in terms of who did what, but make it catchy. Give it a title. so that, people can start to get an idea of how you were thinking about this thing. And again, language is really important. So don't just write scribbly lines for text. Add some text in there, add some welcome notes, make sure your buttons make sense in terms of where people are going next. And here's a couple. So we use these templates to do our storyboarding or solution sketching. You can use blank pieces of paper, you can do it on whiteboards. Just the important thing is that they can live and people can go back to them the next day and see them and look at them, and they're going to start to add stickers to vote. Okay, one other thing that's happening at some point during Tuesday is that you're going out and you're recruiting your customers for Friday. You can also do this earlier, but deadline is definitely by Tuesday so that people can clear their schedules. Each customer is going to spend 1 hour with you in person, so they need to be local. So you're going to look for, you can use a number of channels to find these kinds of customers. We use Craigslist, we use LinkedIn, we use Meetup, we use different channels to find these people. And what you'll do is send them a brief survey, 3, 4, 5 questions to make sure that they're a good fit to spend the day with you. And then you'll follow up with the ones that do qualify, and you'll schedule them 1 hour at a time. And you're gonna find 5 of these people. So that needs to happen by Tuesday so that by Friday it's all lined up. Here comes Wednesday. On Wednesday you have your solution sketches, and what you're gonna do is spend time individually kind of walking around the room silently, looking at the solutions people had put together, and starting to take your little stickers that you'll be given. Everybody in the room has small stickers. The designer has a big sticker. And you start to place stickers next to things that are interesting, that you think could be a good fit to solve the challenge. You can vote on entirely your solution, or you can, of course, you should be looking at other people's and finding the best solution. And what happens is when you step back at the end of this exercise, patterns have started to emerge in terms of this is, there's a whole bunch of stickers on this form or the way that this profile page was laid out. And then you'll bring all of those solutions that have been voted up into your winning storyboard. And it may be, sometimes it turns out that one person had a really bang up solution and that's the solution you prototype, but most times it's a combination of everybody's solutions. And then that turns into your winning sketch or storyboard. And here's an example of a storyboard on a whiteboard on one of our walls that's being created based on different solutions. This winning storyboard is exactly what's going to get built out in terms of the prototype. And that prototype is what we do on Thursday. It's a realistic prototype. I really like how the guys at GV talk about a Goldilocks prototype, because you have 1 day to do this, which is pretty limiting. Most of the prototypes that we've designed are anywhere from 10 to 20 screens, which is a lot. It seems like a lot, and it is a lot of work. And I'm going to show you how people can contribute to make this possible. But so you only have so much time, but you also don't want to cheat and make it so ugly, so unthoughtful, so unintuitive, if that's a word, that your customers start giving you feedback on button colors and placement of forms and things like that. You want them to get through the demo and give you insightful feedback as they're thinking about it, not about your design choices. To build the prototype, you're going to use tools. We recommend you use tools like Keynote, like PowerPoint. You're going to stitch them together in tools like InVision or Marvel. The whole team should be as familiar with as many of the products that you're using to build your prototype as possible. As a firm, New Haircut can take that entire prototype and run it themselves, and we'll use tools like Photoshop and Sketch and different things like that. But it should be something, if you don't have that design expertise or engineering expertise, it should be tools that everybody's as familiar with as possible. And there's a lot you can do with Keynote and PowerPoint as well. Everybody in the room has a role when it comes to prototyping. Again, this can be something that is only done by a group that you might hire outside, like a New Haircut, or you can bring others into the room to help as well that have been part of the sprint. So the asset collector is going out, they're grabbing anything from logos to existing icons to things that exist outside of the brand that can be pulled in and help for the person that's building the prototype in whatever tool you've selected to use. And then the person that's stitching it all together, we like to use tools like Envision or Marvel, because they, out of the box, they have the facility to do animations and taps and clicks and things like that, so that you make the prototype as lifelike as possible. That's the stitcher's job. The wordsmith is, again, going through and making sure the language is appropriate. And then the person running the interview is kind of off on the side, making sure last minute details related to the interviews are all set up and planned for and confirmed. So Friday is the big day to test your prototype. The way that you do this is that you do a one-on-one interview with the customers in a room, and you set up a webcam, and you can live stream that interview to the rest of the sprint team. So it's one-on-one so that the customer isn't overwhelmed by having a panel of people asking them questions. And there's a whole bunch of tactics that you can employ to ask the right questions and let people kind of think out loud. There's a practice of asking questions and trailing off so that you let them kind of fill in the blanks and answer. But you want them talking out loud about their experience using the prototype. And then everybody else that's watching the live stream is capturing that information. And what these guys are doing here is they're watching Donna interview this guy, and they're writing one idea per person, per feature, per page that they're looking at. One idea that they're hearing, one feature, one kind of comment. They put one on each sticky, and then those stickies make their way to this grid. And this is sort of where all the magic is for the entire week, because what you're seeing here, all the things that have been voted up and kind of with the magnets on, those are your features. Those are the big ideas. Those are the things that are going to seed your product roadmap, and eventually the things that you're going to build that have been truly validated by customers. So those are the 5 days. It's intense. It's a lot of fun. I think the collaboration level goes up 300%. You know, we've seen teams that have been working together for years and say that they've never really had that level of collaboration or momentum, or so much has been accomplished. And then, all the typical things can follow. And this is where traditionally a lot of teams begin. They begin by wireframing, and we used to start here too until we, found out the power of sprints. So this is where you can start to take the sprint and the roadmap that you've put in place as a result of the sprint and all the recommendations that came out of it, and then you start your designs, your wireframes. You start a code sprint is something proprietary to New Haircut that we've created to help companies think out their software application architecture, their infrastructure. What, are they going to host on AWS? What's that going to cost per month? What kind of resources will they need? And then we'll actually take the wireframes and all the thinking through the design sprints, and we'll build out the foundational code that the rest of the application will sit upon. And that's something that it's our baseline. And then we go in to build the actual product development on top of that. And that, again, is a 5-day process where we bring engineering talent into the room and accomplish a lot of things that, again, have traditionally taken weeks and months to figure out which libraries, which third-party resources, how are we hosting this thing, all those things, which technology stack are we using, all those things get addressed and answered in a 5-day program. And the last is just making sure that you have a growth plan in place. We're a fan of pirate metrics, right? So acquisition, activation, retention, referrals, revenue, just a way to track that your growth trajectory is on point and aligns to those KPIs that you started with at the beginning of your sprint, and probably some of the metrics that you have in your pitch decks and things that you've been thinking about and talking to investors and early customers about. So that's it. I'm going to open it up to questions. Stop that. So anybody that has any questions, we've got 10 minutes, but I'm here. I have no rush. But ask questions in the chat. Give you guys a couple minutes. If nothing, then we can wrap up, and I'll publish this video into YouTube so you guys can watch and share. Okay, well, if no questions, I really appreciate you guys joining today. We're going to do more of these for sure. This was actually the first one that we're doing. I'd love comments when we post it on YouTube, or I'm going to send around a communication when you'll have my direct email. So I'd love to hear if you guys want to hear about other topics related to design thinking or product development, or kind of just building technology companies, how to hire people, how to hire technology expertise. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. I'd love to hear your ideas and your thoughts and suggestions for future talks like these. But thanks again for joining, and hope to see you at the next one. Take care.